Okay. All right. So my name is Dr. Catherine Quinlan. For purposes of talk, I am going to be Catherine Quinlan, the author. I am an assistant professor in science education at Howard University School of Education. Prior to this, I've taught biology and chemistry for 16 years in the K-12 setting and have been at Howard for almost 6 years. I am seeing a request to spotlight. I think I've spotlighted both interpreters. Is there someone I'm missing? Okay. No? Okay. So today I'm going to focus on my Keystone Passage book series that I started and talk to you a little bit about my motivation for doing this. Along with later on touching on some of my work. And so far I've written 2 books in the Keystone Passage series. The first one is To Africa and Back, and the second one is Day and Night on the Space Station. And these books, I capitalize on research that I'm doing, such as the work I did on creating my curriculum in African rock art image analysis, as well as the work I did when I taught teachers all over the US on about the International Space Station and microgravity. And so I decided to use that background along with my current NSF funded work on the African American Gullah Geechee and creating curricula to do this book, because I've been doing a lot of the background information. So what inspires me about this and what drives me? One of the first thing I want to highlight is I started thinking about books very differently when I became a mother. And so as a mother, there are many other considerations that I had to think about in reading to my child and my boy. And one of the things that came up in his reading, as I read to him, even in picture book series, as well as these chapter book series that he loves, and he has all of them, the Boxcar Children, the Magic Tree House, I started seeing how these stories and narratives, did not target Black children, did not target African American children, but the target audience was certainly not my child. And so this is one of the things that drove me when I look at the narratives of detail, Boxcar Children, the grandfather owns an island, which certainly resonated with me in my research on African American Gullah Geechee and things that have happened there on the island. I saw how history was embedded in a lot of, and culture was embedded in such a way that certain things were celebrated that I thought would affect the identity of my child. And so as I read to him over and over again as well, I also saw how even narratives about, because I've been researching extensively on African culture, African heritage, I saw how some of those ideas are also embedded in a lot of these series. I only highlighted 2, but there are many others. I saw also how Native American heritage was embedded in some of the things that were done. And so that drove me to start a book series, because one of the things I found was I found a couple of books, maybe 4 of them, that were written by Black authors, and the research shows that less than 50% of the books are written by Black authors that are representative, but I'm also learning that sometimes they're written by whites who also have Black children. And so this is one of the things that drives me, because I think that in my lifetime, I'd like to see a series like this created for Black children and for my future. One of the things that inspires me is my own upbringing. I think that even though I was born here in the US, I did grow up elsewhere in an environment where that was very different, in an environment where I was able to enjoy my childhood. I grew up very sheltered. And I've come to see that if I did, even though I was born in the US and my mom traveled around and we lived elsewhere, but if I grew up here, I believe I would have had to have different considerations and things to think about. Instead of focusing on the moments I enjoy. At some point in my childhood, I believe I would have spent time in my childhood I mean, we all do in our childhood in some way, but the idea that as a child, I would need to figure out how to resist to others, how to explain myself to others. The thought of it for me just sounded rather exhausting. And, you know, just the extent to which I would have to define myself relative to others, and in a manner in which I just, you know, very problematic for me. And I want to mention that, you know, in terms of growing up and being able to, I realize I developed a confidence that, that felt as if there are certain things that stand out to me now, that if you had to explain yourself, that, you know, just seemed rather interesting. Having my son, and just doing a lot of culture crossing growing up with my son here, you know, race is a topic that we've had to talk about, looking into see what culture and whose culture and which part of his culture he gets to learn about, which part he doesn't get to learn about. And so even as a young age with my son, and even now, you know, race is an important part of our daily discussion and trying to think about what's best for him and how he defines himself, and making sure that his perspectives about different cultures, including Black culture, is healthy. And one of the, you know, I'm thinking about even as a child, and I remember when, I know it's around, I know he wasn't 2 as yet. The only reason I know is because he was literally laying there and we were changing him. And even as someone who was a 16-month-old, they make these observations and asked his daddy, what color am I? You know, what color is mommy? What color are you? And so just making sure he forms a really healthy perspective. I think that I highlight my grandma here because grandmas are very important to many of us in our culture. And I see no matter where you are, you're Black, no matter which country you are in Africa, African Americans in the United States, it's one of the things we do have in common that bonds us. And so my grandma is important to me in many, many different ways. Even now, as I bond with my family, one of the things that keeps coming up, that has come up that I didn't know about her, was when she was getting married, they wanted to straighten her hair. And I was just amazed to hear that she would not let them. And she insisted on not doing so. And I remember one day getting dressed to go and I straightened my hair. My son looked at me and said, "Mommy, your hair looks nice." And the truth is I was devastated, you know, by the extent of his compliment, because I didn't want him to get the idea that to dress nice, I had to straighten my hair. And so at that point, I'll be honest, I did completely stop doing that, so that he can have a healthy perspective of what it meant to be Black. And so one of the things that highlighted for me in culture crossing in different ways is even being in college and seeing how much effort I had to make to discover me at different times, and even the effort I had to make in trying to embed ideas and learn about me as I pursue this journey, is one of the reasons and one of the things that continue to inspire me, to make sure that our children have healthy identity formation. And so I want to highlight through this journey that I do self-publish my work. I do intentionally self-publish my work for several reasons. When I look at the market and who are deciding the publishing, I felt that, you know, given I'm in academia with a great deal of experience, and even my dissertation being an applied cognitive psych, and combining it with science, I wanted to make sure that I felt that I felt confident about the decisions I make in determining what narratives are important and best for Black children. And so the mission that I created my own company to publish this is to create meaningful and authentic representations that Black children can positively identify with their own sense of self. My goal is to encourage connections with Black narratives, heritage, and lives to promote positive identity formation in Black children with what defines them as quintessentially Black. And so some of the questions I ask myself is, just because it happened, or just because this is somebody else's problem, is it helpful to our Black children for it to be explicit or implicit? And so as I create these narratives, these are all questions I think about. What is important to know and why, and what is the impact this would have? And so what I rely on are, I have a lot of parents I connect with. So for example, in my son's school, their feedback. I constantly get feedback, and I get feedback from African-American parents, Black parents, as well as white parents as well, who've given me feedback. This feedback happened to have been from Black parents, where, you know, when my first book came out, actually not this one, To Africa and Back, this was her reaction, and she wrote a long text, I think because we're all amazed by her reaction. She said, oh, hey, there's a girl who looks like me. And then she flips through the book and finds a page with a picture of a tent and the kids and says, oh, cool, they have a tent, and then she disappears. We get inside the house, she takes the book, heads to the back, and she didn't even take off her glasses. She just sat there reading because she was just intrigued by the initial picture. And another parent, there was a story that happened where she started to describe, her daughter started to describe, when the librarian asked her what she read over the summer, she mentioned my book and all the things she learned. And so when my son came home and told me, and then I talked, she's like, yeah, yep, that happened. We're still reading it. The girls love it. I do too. I even just love the names of the kids. Representation matters. And so, you know, this is the feedback that I value. This is the feedback that's important to me. I have had white parents as well who have given me great feedback about how much their kid loved it as well. But above all, any publisher, this is what drives my decision making. The other thing I consider as I bridge theory and practice in creating these books is a curriculum. And so that's what I'm funded by NSF to do, and to bridge theory and practice and looking at representation and what this means. So as I create my book and as I create my curriculum, my goal is to continue to allow them to complement each other so that they can be used in classrooms for self-discovery. And so I want to pause here before I go on to the next part of this presentation and share an excerpt, as well as let's do an activity together to see what questions you have. I see one question: what grades your curriculum focused on? So and it's interesting you asked, because I'm actually gonna, in the next part of it, I'll show you why and how it cuts across grades depending on the extent to which you want to go in depth, and which is why I intentionally allow this science to be used as a way of knowing and as a way of exploring. The books and the book and the curriculum, I've been targeting the middle, including elementary as well as middle school, but early middle school. I will share some resources so you get to see some handouts I've created as well. Any other questions? No, okay. As you do that also, for the next part of the activity, if you want to situate yourself at your dining table with some, with a plate and some spoon and things you can mix. I think that would help the next part. So in this next phase, what I want to do is I want to read a small excerpt from the book and show you there are small areas, 1 or 2 small areas where I do explicitly talk about race, and I'll show you how. And I'm not going to read the whole chapter. I'm just going to read an excerpt and talk about, and then go into the curriculum aspect where you get to do an activity. Okay. So the excerpt, I know you have access to the first chapter on Amazon, but I wanted to read this for the parts of chapter 2, and I'm going to skip around and show you the pictures and tell you why I selected these, just how it connects. So the second chapter is called Hidden Treasure. The more the cousins cleared the rock, the more pleased they were with their find, and also the more intrigued. There were strange grooves in the rock. We can put our smaller treasure in these grooves, said Keisha. Hello, a voice called from the outside the tent. Keisha hid the triangular rock beneath her backpack. It might be robbers come to steal our treasure, she said. It's just Monty, said Cliff. Monty stuck his head into the tent. What are you doing? He asked. We're clearing the dirt off our treasure, said Cliff. Monty saw the grooves and was intrigued. Can I see this for a moment? Asked Monty. Seeing Keisha's reluctance, look, he added, you'll get it back. Keisha gave him the stone. Monty turned the small triangular slab over. They all saw that there was writing on it. Cliff took out his brush from his treasure hunt kit. He brushed the dirt away from the words so they could be read. The words were written in cursive, so Monty had to read the inscription for them. Layansa Piegin, Ahuden, Layansa Naina, Ne Osaua. I wonder what that means, said Keisha. Cliff and Monty were more intrigued by the idea that someone could do cursive on rock. How did they carve this? The rock is hard, so what would they have used to get something written this neatly, asked Cliff. Maybe they used a special pen, said Keisha. A pen couldn't carve into a surface as hard, said Cliff. They must have had some kind of machine. This rock must be very old. Looks like you all dug pretty far down to get it, said Monty. The deeper you dig, the older the find. He turned it to the side with the grooves. He ran a finger along the strange petroglyphs. They were smooth to the touch. The grooves remind me of something I saw in a documentary, so the thought that it could be true is quite scary. What do you mean? Why would it be scary? Asked Cliff. Well, maybe not scary, but I read that Africans created carvings that were inspired during sacred ceremonies. So this is a very spiritual thing. Spiritual how? Asked Keisha. I'm not sure how to explain it, said Monty. Suddenly they heard Chandra calling out, hey, you all, it's time to eat. I can't believe you've all been digging in there for hours. Grandma wants you to come in and wash up. Chandra peeked in and saw the dirt piled up. Wait here, she sighed. Does that mean that the spirits or ghosts left this rock with the grooves in it? And so skip over later. Chandra hates dirt, so she has to wash him. And something happens. I'm not gonna read that part. I want to skip over to a part where they actually ended up someplace else. I'll have you read the transition. So Cliff, so they ended up someplace else and she's crying out, where are we? Cliff, Monty, and Keisha could barely hear her. They stood there staring in wonder at a life-size giraffe that was painted on the wall. They raised their heads all the way back so they could see the top of it. Even so, they had to step back so they could see the entire giraffe. No one spoke for some time. Even Chandra stopped yelling because she realized no one was listening. They were staring at something. She looked up because they looked up. Her eyes followed from the top of the giraffe's head downward. She was also speechless. Monty broke the silence. This reminds me of the African rock art that I read about. From what I remember, large giraffes would most likely be located in the Sahara regions, if I'm not mistaken, in Libya, in the northern part of Africa. Honestly, you've got Africa on the brain, said Sandra. Well, it's important to know about our ancestors, said Monty. Sure, but we're American. We should focus on that. Here in America is where we live, said Chandra. Here is America? Are you sure that's where we are? Asked Monty. And so I wanted to read that excerpt because a lot of this, the book is about their adventure and discovering parts of Africa and different things about Africa, especially as it related to my curriculum on African rock art. And the nice thing about this is that you get to, and in their areas, I talk about a little bit about the science and how the science connects. I try not to do too much of it so that, I didn't drag the book on, but so let me just pull up the next part of this that will allow you to explore what kind of science can you explore. So everybody sees the PowerPoint, right? Okay. I'm assuming that's a yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And so I created a curriculum on African rock art image analysis because and I wrote a paper on it. The whole idea here is, so if we want to explore, we want to discover, how do we use our African heritage as an asset, our African heritage to explore? And a lot of the background information African rock art is some of the things, it's one of those extremely studied work that are an important part of African heritage. People study from a scientific level and a different ways. So this paper I did was on the Khoisan Africans, because their artwork, their culture is the most studied in Africa. And I'm not going to go into as detail, even though I tend to give separate talks on the Khoisan Africans, to the point where they did create a law, bioethics law, because they felt like people just walked into their homes and studied them without their permission. One of the work I do is allow students to explore the chemistry connections. This is a video clip that I will share with you, a little bit like a 2-minute video about African rock art. So as I start this, I ask students, we distinguish between pictographs and petroglyphs, and then they have a list of images that they can interpret or write observations about. And I'll show you the handouts. And so I've done this with kindergarten students. I've done this with first graders. I've done it with my pre-service students, really asking what they observe. And on every level, I've done it with graduate students as well in conferences and science educators. Students tend to make observations that sometimes we don't think about. And it's a great opportunity to help us to distinguish between what's an observation and what's an inference, right? Some might observe that they're life size, and some might infer, oh, this is a family. How did you know that? Well, because they're all different sizes, it must be a family. So it's a great opportunity. What's an observation versus an inference? I've had kindergartners spot and say, oh, well, there's a shadow. And, thinking about the sun, it can tell you what direction the sun is coming from. And in the paper I wrote, there are connections to what are they drawing and why, and who gets to interpret what it means. And so when we get to the explore, one of the questions that have come up frequently is, how did it do that? Because research has shown that some of these art date back 5,000 years. So how is it they've lasted so long? Why? And then there's so many factors to consider. What is the type of rocks? What is the type of paint? And so scientists have done a lot of research. And one of the things that we tend to look at is think about, what would you use as a color? What would you use as a binder? What would you use as a liquid? Right? And so Mary Leakey, scientist, she's done some work on what constitutes these. And one of the things that have come up is the ochre. Ochre is a type of iron oxide, right? Gives it sometimes a little reddish color. You're talking about limestone, chalk. And so what would the equivalent be in your classroom for what we would use in the classroom to explore this? Okay, and it's very similar to how we make crayons today. Well, Africans have been doing it for a while. And so what I've done is the equivalent of, let's just say, the binder, you have the petroleum, the equivalent of the plant juice. I've used things like chocolate syrup, limestone, which would be calcium carbonate, would be equivalent of that, would be chalk, right? Some of the art they found has coal in it, which leads to many debate, because then people are asking, am I dating recent art with old coal, or am I dating old art with old coal? And so one of the things we've done, I've done it in conferences. This, I have to say, this is not my idea. I did get it from someone who got it from a teacher, and putting the paper under there, and then kids kind of pretended they're in a cave drawing and deciding, what are you going to draw with? And there's a lot of variations that you can do with this. So if you can take a moment, I'm going to share the resource, but I'm also going to ask you to think about what you might want to use as a color in your, we'll discuss that, what you might want to use a binder in your kitchen. And so on my website, I've created a couple of video clips. This video clip actually was created for professional development. I just added the top one. This one is more focused. This one shows me making the chalk and cutting it up. Here's a teacher guide that you can use, what kind of questions you can ask the students, when to show the video, what can you tell from the image. What I've done is I've printed out the images and passed it around, or I also have a link on the website with the list of images that you can use with your students, and they can is a great way to have them combine art, science, and writing their observations. And so I say this can be done at different levels because it depends on what grade you're using it. For the more sophisticated students, I've actually looked at the type of chemical reactions, right? We can look at double replacement reactions, the type of reactions that actually produce color. For little kids, we can do it as simple as a mixture. And so I have several handouts here that you can print. Students can write what they observe. And they can explore. How do you create a paint? What would you use for color? What are some variables you would use? I do have a more advanced one I haven't posted yet. And why? Okay, and different observations they've made. And they can even come up with their own data table. I do have the PowerPoint that you can use in your class. The connections to the standards, looking at patterns. The engage. So the PowerPoints are available for you as well. The links to the PowerPoints are there if you want to learn a little bit of historical data, a little bit of connections. These images are from the British Museum. So if you select one of these, you'll see that it takes you to the description that some of the scientists did on telling you what they are about. If you wanted to use this for, there's some of them with a lot of descriptions. So that one just didn't happen to. The clothing, things like that. Okay. So this is just one of the, I'm going to pause here for questions. I know I've been talking quite a bit. I'll pause here for questions and any questions? Okay, so where did the African rock art images originate? And so the nice thing is, one of the things we do, let me see if I have that on my website. Oh, interesting. Okay. So let me find it for you. I know it's somewhere on my website, but you actually get to explore where the African rock art and the type of African rock art that are found here. There's a map. Okay. And so depending on where and which people you're exploring, you get to see where they're from. Okay. They look very different depending on the type of rocks. So you get to explore from that perspective. Okay. You also get to explore some of the narratives behind it. You can read some of the publications in the National Geographic newsletters and booklets that they've created. Okay, so I've created a lot of these links on my website here. There is a lot of work that connects this to climate. When you look at the type of leaves, the type of things that you find. And so I started doing this. I didn't post, I haven't updated this, but you can connect it to some Smithsonian work, looking at leaf margin analysis. The Smithsonian link here, you can explore. I've put both of them there. So there are a lot of connections that you can make to that. Some of them are developed, some of them are still in the works in my research phase. Any other questions? How do you recommend pairing the Keystone passage? Okay, so I see this working well in terms of, especially if you are, Michelle, are you elementary? What grade level do you teach?
Fourth grade.
Fourth grade. So you teach all the subject areas, right?
All of them, and then to add on to that, we do bilingual, but we do get to teach science and English.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I recommend doing them. You can do them in tandem where, you know, if your students are doing reading, right? And they can, and I have to post some of the questions. They can answer questions, reflections on the reading aspect and their writing aspect, on their comprehension aspect. So you connect the English. And at the same time, they can explore and create observations, do experiments, creating paint, connecting it with the science, connecting it with the art, at the same time. And also there's a history perspective, right? If you're doing social studies, a lot of these websites lends itself to the social studies aspect. So it just comes together kind of nicely. The nice thing about this too, in terms of the Quezon, one of the things I've done is connected it with the food. I've connected it with a lot of what I've learned, especially about the Quezon. And then there's some historical connections that, you know, if an elementary student were to read it, they wouldn't notice it. And that's not a bad thing. It's intentional. But if somebody wanted to analyze this on a college level, there are some connections that, additional connections that they can make based on things that have happened. Because I've purposely selected and thought about that, even through the idea of how I name people, right? And what do the names remind you of? And who they encounter along the way. And the second part of it, which I haven't posted yet, I think because I've just gotten so used to teaching it, Day and Night at the Space Station looks a lot at microgravity. And so I'll work on doing that. I'll post it. I'll post that link because NASA has a great site, great resources on microgravity. Actually, where they sometimes students ask, well, how do they go to the bathroom? So these are things that I talk about in this book, where you get to show different astronauts, whether it's Sony Williams, whether it's African-American astronauts who've actually been on the International Space Station. You know, how they go to the bathroom and why. And so some of these ideas I've explored, even the twin study, mostly because I've taught this. And so that's why I was like, oh, the research is done. The twin studies where I mentioned one of those where they had to figure out how do you know, what are we going to eat and things like that, right? And the foods that were created, the things that what's the other one? Tang, right? That was created because they needed to figure out how you're going to feed scientists in space and International Space Station. A lot of the food preservation techniques that we use right now today, even our cell phones, that's a spin-off from the International Space Station because they needed to be able to communicate with astronauts. The monitors, the health monitors that have been created are spin-off from the need to create them for astronauts because you need to monitor them at a distance. You needed, you know, cell phones. The technology came from a lot of the work they needed to do there. And so there's just a lot of rich connections that you can make with the International Space Station. And I guess it's time I should just post some of these PowerPoints since I haven't really taught that in years. You know, so there's just so much you can connect it. You know, this part of science, along with reading about the book and their questions. I try to create little mysteries. I'm getting better and better at it. Just FYI, as a self-publisher, I do have to build in my own quality control. And so one of the things I continuously do is train. With the first book, I did hire he's a very famous author who mentored and gave me feedback and was tremendous help on this. And then the third one, which I conceived before, but I know it would take longer. You know, I'm doing a different approach and different training, and I'm excited about the third one because I embed some of my current NSF work in a different way in that. So, any other questions? What does your writing process look like when writing a text? Okay. Very different each time. The first time, because I was discovering the writing process, when I was at Barnard undergrad, I was both English major as well as pre-med. And so in terms of discovering the writing process, the first one I think was a little bit more linear, right? Because I knew exactly what I was going to write about. I had researched on African rock art. I didn't have to do anything additional. And the second one is a little bit more linear too. The third one is a little different because I have to embed the research and I'm trying to add other dimensions. And so I'm writing a third one so differently. One of the inspiration for me in writing is my son. When I was writing the first one, it used to be our bonding time. So when I'm done working, maybe from 4 to 5, I would write a chapter and then he would want to read it or I would read it to him. And so it's like, oh, what's the rest of the next chapter? What's next? Right. And so that was my motivation. So I'd say at the beginning, it was a little bit more linear. I think now, as I continue to train to develop my writing, it's very different, especially this one. This one, in trying to master certain things that, I started off with certain ideas that I played out a lot of chapter books like magic, right? I'm trying to capture what that means, but at the same time, I'm not trying to make it too magical, right? I'm trying to move away from that in some ways, but there are elements of that for discovery. I think this third book would be the hardest to write, but I think it's the one that'll be interesting, and even I'm excited. I don't even know how it's going to turn out. That book I write in scenes, thinking about what they're discovering and why, and just different dimensions that I'm developing. I don't know if that answers your question, Adrienne. Any advice for others trying to self-publish, especially for kids of color? Okay, so, wow. I would say train. I use, and it's not because I'm trying to advertise them or endorse them, but I do like them, the Storyteller Academy. They have more picture book resources. They don't have as much, they're actually adding more chapter books. And so, Kimberly, are you interested in picture books or chapter books?
Picture books.
Okay, so then they're perfect for that as well. I would say join a writing group, and that's a writing group that I am a part of that I recommend. You get mentors there, you get to meet illustrators, you get to meet other writers who are just like you, thinking out ideas. Tell Ari Chung is the guy who runs it. He wrote the book Mixed. Tell him I sent you. If you decide to. No, I'm kidding, you don't have to, but it would just be funny. So I have mentioned them in the beginning of the book, thanking Storyteller Academy very briefly, because one of the mentors is a famous author who I hired on the side to work with me as well. So I would say mentoring groups, writing groups to give each other feedback, having friends. If you have a child, I gauge my interest on, other people's kids. Yeah. So does anyone want to try making, what would you use? We can talk about it. What would you use as a color that's in your cupboard if you wanted to make paint? What would you use as a liquid and what would you use as a binder? Mustard. Yeah. So what else would you use for color? Allison, you have your hand up?
I would use turmeric. I dyed a whole bunch of face masks for kids at school yesterday with turmeric.
Yeah.
So far it's good. I guess it doesn't last in sunlight forever, but it worked really well. They looked beautiful.
That's awesome. And that's what I do when I'm teaching my course. I ask students to grab something, grab this, put it on their plate. What would you use for a binder? What would you use for a binder? Egg, okay. Anything else? Applesauce, right? So those are all things you cook with as well, right? And by the way, those items are very related to actually how they go about making crayon. And you can even combine this, you know, for those of you who teach entrepreneurship, you can take it to that next level and looking at their video clips and how do you make crayons, right? There's a lot of commonality in there. I break up charcoal. I break up chalk for color as well. But whether or not you're teaching at home or online, I just have people grab things from their cupboards and put it on their plates and mix it up. And we analyze, we did this with the pre-service students. We talk about which one makes which texture, right? What's the best texture, which one, what are characteristics you would look for in choosing what would make the best paint. Maybe if someone come up with the best combination, which will last, and you all could sell it, right? You know, have a little quarter or 10 cents, you know, entrepreneurs. And, you know, you could link it to that as well. Making of crayons, making of paint. Cabbage, romaine lettuce, awesome. Yeah, the different oils, avocado. I see Laura, you're highlighted. Were you going to say something? I'm trying to recognize that. What is that, Carrie?
It's romaine lettuce. I wrap it up in wet towels and you'll get a little red, purple.
Oh, that is so cool.
Anywhere that it's kind of oxidizing.
Yeah, wow. And any other questions? Oh, the websites. I don't think I shared the websites with you. Before we go, I know we have 2 minutes. Let me share the websites. I see, Laura, you're highlighted. I'm not sure if you're trying to talk. Oh, I am giving a webinar in April because I'm launching my curriculum lab. On one of the papers I wrote recently, I'll share that with you. I'll share the recent paper I forgot about. Here's a link if you're interested in attending that webinar. I can send out a link to you in April. I do it around April because I know DC schools are out. But I'm going to give a couple days webinar. I'm going to have my students also going to present. I teach the curriculum and instruction honors at Howard, and they've written some of their own representation books, which are very interesting. And so I also have some of the Gullah Geechee African Americans who are part of my research, and so we can get a paper, are going to be there presenting as well. And so that's how I'm kind of quote unquote summing up the first phase of my work, as well as launching the curriculum lab, where I've invited, here's a paper. You'll see in this paper, teachers have given me feedback on the animation that I wrote. And let's see from the videos. And some of the curriculum work I've done, if you use vernier, does anyone use vernier instruments at all in their classroom to measure, you know, pressure and reactions and things like that? You know, it can be as simple or it can be as complex. And here's the videos from the African American Gullah Geechee work that I did in South Carolina. And the paper describes the process and the type of considerations. And I think My time is up. Are there questions I missed? Any other questions before we head out? And I think you already have my author's site. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for listening and for being here. I appreciate it.